Hi, it's Writing Wednesday, and I have been asked to talk about organizing your research. I posted some of my card files, that index card files that were going into storage and drafts and so forth. I'm cleaning out my office to make way for the next project. And people surprised me by being curious about how do you organize your research, something that I hadn't really thought about. Um, and I said, sure. So I dug them out. They're not in the secret cavern, the catacombs of old book notes and research. I put them back in the file boxes so you can see what they look like. I was a history major, so doing research is something that I've been. I don't think much about it. I do it, and I do it as thoroughly as I can, and I dig out as much as I can. But the issue of how do you organize all that stuff, especially when you're researching in many different aspects of life. You know, if I was writing, say, a book about the Russian Revolution, I'm interested in the timeline of the revolution. I'm interested in especially certain events that happened in the city where my character lives, which is Petrograd. And then there's going to be a lot of other research besides just what physically events that happen. There's going to be also opinion by various the various real life characters who were involved in the revolution, like Lenin and Trotsky and members of the provisional government and the Tsar and his crew, and what was going on in the unions. You know, you have a panorama of ideas and notes. The occurrences of the actual moment of revolution, or two of them, becomes important almost on an hour-to-hour basis. And I had to have that, excuse me, I had to have that thoroughly in my mind before or while I was writing, because everything had to be, it's historical, it's real, everything had to be exactly right. I am a great one for, I'll dreaming stuff up, but you don't dream up stuff that actually happened. You have to, mush events together and stuff like that. That's just out. Hey, so how do you handle all this research? What happens is that you need it to be accessible. It's one thing to do the research, but if you can't get to the research that you've been doing, then what good is it? It has to be retrievable, so that it's important to categorize. And the first kind of research organization I'll show you is Highland as the classic history student of history. The index card system is just, that's what we had back in the day, is we had index cards. So when you got your book, it was one thing to have books from the library. From your own books, you just can underline, mark up, and put flags in it, and just remember, oh yeah, what did John Reed say about this? It's in 10 Days That Shook the World, and then you can go and pull it off your shelf, and it's all underlined and marked. But most of your work is going to be library research. You can't keep the book and draw all over it and put flags in it and keep it on the shelf. If I kept every book, if I bought every book that I used in writing the two Russian Revolution novels, I would just still be paying off my credit cards, and I wouldn't have any room in this house. I used probably a couple of hundred books. So what do you do for your research when you're doing library research? Well, the index card is great. You can just keep it like on the book as you're reading it and write stuff down. You don't even need your computer. I wanted to show you my, I'll show you my file boxes so you can see what it looks like. I'm turning this around. All right, so I dug these back out and put them back in the boxes where they came from. So you can see this one is The Last Days of 1916, which is the run-up to the Revolution, to the February Revolution. And these will have cards in there where I'm talking about the Baltic Fleet, what's happening to the Baltic Fleet. I can... The government presents the dangers of German attack ever more alarmingly. Urgent telegrams, blah, blah, blah. Defense of the Soviet. Made sense. This is what it looks like. And in the name of the Soviet is obviously the key here. It's important to put where you got your research. Like here's one on disease. And it's got, like here's spring 1918, the cholera epidemic, which is in my book. Here are some figures. 30,000 in July dead, 12,000 sick in Petrograd. This is in the city that my character's in. B and J, the classic note card will look more like this. The topic in the corner, say, disease in Petrograd. The source, BJ, is Bread and Justice by Mary McNamara. I have cards in bibliography. I have a bibliography section that I just list all the books that I used separately, so I don't spell them out every time. I just, Russia in the Shadows, by H.G. Wells. And then I can just say RIS for Russia in the Shadows. So anyway, it's sort of a mess because I took them out to get rid of them, and now I'm trying to reassemble it for you to see. But it gives you an idea. Here's Shear, Notes on Literary Life in Petrograd. So I would, at Slavic 77, A Tale of Three Houses. So if I use that, I'd probably just up here write Shear or just initials, so I know what it was. And then you'd paraphrase whatever it is that whatever they're talking about. You paraphrase, or you use quotes. But it's better, it's good to paraphrase because you're already writing. You're already starting to break down what the author said in your own words and pull out the concept that was most striking to you. So this one, if I had been doing a classic, if I was writing a history of this, which I'm not, I'm a fiction writer, so I can be a lot looser about it, I would write about cholera epidemic, spring 1918, Petrograd would be my topic. I just threw it over here, disease, and where Spanish influenza came in the wake of cholera, typhus and smallpox. So when I'm writing about the period, I can talk about what it was like to live in that period. So here we are at the brink of revolution, 1916, and I'm getting working conditions, Petrograd working conditions. 60% worked in the metal trade, 11% in the textile trade, all these basic industrial facts that I'm going to need to populate my world. And so that's going to be in the last days of 1916. Then I start with, let's see, the February Revolution. So this is obviously a book that I'd used about the February Revolution, and Alitskaya, talks about people yelling never again in front of the police stations. Just a little fact, something I can use, what was going on at the Tauride Palace, the main magnet of popular grievances. So what I do, because of the revolution was so month to month, I did it, month to month. January, February, here's the February Revolution, March, April, and just what the heck was going on. Here's that B&J, which was super good, Bread and Justice. Talk about the trams, how they ran, what was going on. And then this is the actual revolution when I get day to day like this. And so I can go back to this again and again and go, okay, what was happening on this date? What was happening on this date? March 12th, the provisional government repeals the death penalty. Then we're going into May, June, July, August, September. What's going on here? War, communism. And then October to December. And then I have day to day when we get into the October Revolution. Day to day. So that I can follow what's going on. And so we have a number of different writers that I'm taking notes from, but it's all going to be in the same place so I can find it day to day. Here was a section of day to day at the U.S. Embassy. So there was more English language stuff, and I could find out what was going on. Here's health and housing, very important, and all the commissariats. I needed to know this over and over. So I needed these places in a way I could use them. So that was mostly the revolution. And then this is mostly social life. So Petersburg, stuff about Petersburg. The city had no distinct nationality. That's me, City of Alive, Like and Solar. A cradle of gray purple stone. That's obviously from something. Street names. Street information. I have stuff about the war. I have stuff about going to school because my protagonist was a kid. What they studied, what they were interested in. Bread riots, that was under the war, I think. But can hardly see what that says anymore. But I want to know about food, about bread, about domestic life. How did you do your clothes, stuff like that. School, war, Russia. Anyway, the important thing about using any kind of a system, and this I cannot tell you enough, the only thing that's important about organizing your research is so it is usable. It's not about getting an A from your junior high teacher. You want to avoid doing things that you think you have to do before you write. So it is better to do it as you take those notes. You think, what will I need this for? And remember to create a category so that you can, is it day-to-day revolution? Is it, something about street life in that city in general? Is it about stuff about the war? Is it stuff about, popular jokes? And this is what you do when you're doing library research. I do not want to type that stuff up on my computer and have to go back and forth and back and forth. I want to read it, and I have the note card right on the book as I'm reading it, and I make my note and I put it in my file box. And so this is what file box look like. They're just snapped together. These are big ones because I knew that there would be a lot of research with this. This is the large, the 3 by whatever these are, the 3 by 6 or 4 by 6. These are the big note cards. Some people use the small note cards, more portable, and you can always put a few in your pocket. So it is not, don't slice and dice it too fine, because you will be spending more time categorizing note cards than you will getting the notes, moving on, getting the information, moving on, and putting it in a place where it is going to be accessible. So my advice is not to put too narrow those little dividers. Don't make them too narrow. If you're writing about a fishing, say somebody's a fishing guide in the Caribbean, and you need to put lists of fish, obviously. You might not want to have a separate fish, flora and fauna, 2 categories, ocean. You might want to have just like flora and fauna and make sure that the lists of the things that you catch when you're fishing are in that category. So that when you're writing, you go, what's a good fish? Now, that is one of the many systems that I use. I'm not tied to it, and it sometimes gives me flashbacks of being in college. But in doing a bunch of library research, that was the only way to organize that, to catch and keep that information. But I'm going to show you a few other ways that I also did research for the Russian books, because there was so much research. I'm a great believer in maps. I love a map. My head, I have kind of a spatial imagination. If I can see where something happens, then I can find it and refer to it. So here is Civil War maps, Russia 1919-1920. So this will be Chimes of a Lost Cathedral. And because the map that's in the book was not necessarily the map that I was working with, I had to make my own map. So here's what, let me weight this down with something. So here is the Civil War map that I made, loosely where everything is. These battles were these towns, south of Tikhvin, you know where that is. And then that's 100 miles east of Leningrad. Okay. There is no Leningrad. Petrograd. So I wanted to have some idea of where all these towns were, the Civil War towns. And so here's Mari, where the dacha was, the gate, and some of the towns around there. That's a river. We're following a river course. Everything is always divided along a river in Russia. And then there's Vologda, east of St. Petersburg. And it just gives you an idea of where she was with, I think this is when she was on the land with Kolya. Anyway, so you make your own maps, and then you have a much better idea. I'll make a map of an apartment. Here's, I don't even know what these are. And clearly these were something or other. I kept them. I don't know what that was. And then I'll use I will use maps and mark them. Here's a big Russia map that I used for a certain battle that I was trying to... This was the German advance on... Okay, let me lay these down. So this was the German advance on Petrograd that I needed in... come on, I need more room here. There we go. So I needed to know where the different battalions were, where things... The 7th Army was coming at Tsarsky Selo. So this is, again, the attack on Petrograd when she is moved to the defense of Petrograd, and how big these forces were and where they were. To me, this gives me a sense of the reality of what I am writing about. This is not something I'm pulling out of the air or some other less dignified place. You know, this is, it reminds me how real this was, and it puts me inside the research. It puts me inside the period. I do a lot of mapping of ideas, and timeline is really important. You know, obviously in a Civil War, in a book about revolution, Civil War, there's so much going on with so many people, and then you also have the war itself. So I do a lot of mapping on large sheets of paper like this. Here's October 1917, and kind of you probably won't be able to read this, but kind of a visualization of October 1917. What were the soldiers and sailors doing? What were the workers doing? What was the war going on? All of this stuff had to be tracked. Specific dates have to be kept straight. You know, what was going on in Helsingfors, which is Helsinki, and Kronstadt. And, you know, just coming across and kind of giving me, it's almost like a score that a conductor to conduct a symphony needs the whole picture laid out in one place. So this was my attempt to do that. Let's see what this one was. This was between the February Revolution, October Revolution, of different events that happened, and trying to break them down, trying to keep all of this information in my head at once. You know, here's Riga fell, 21. So we have a domestic struggle going on at the same time as a world war, and trying to keep all that information together was quite interesting. And then what happened was, here's something else. I'm a big on ring binders. So there's Marina. That was the original title of the novel, Marina Makarova, which my agent could not remember or pronounce. So became Marina M. And this was just my attempt to keep a timeline going. So what time of year was it? Where are we? What time is it? Again, trying to get a big picture, like a conductor's score. So I can just keep track and keep this whole thing in my head. I'm not big at post-it notes, and I'm not big at whiteboarding. I'm big on ring binders. So this will start linking me with the index cards. As I'm writing, I'm keeping track of where I am in the story, what's going on, the bear, which actually eventually came out. But, with the father seems boring, we got to change that, got to deal with that. I did deal with that. So this is notes, not only on research, but reading my own stuff and talking about my own, like what I want to change about it, things that aren't doing well, or is there a change? Like, what is the change in every chapter? If there's no change, I have to go back and deal with that. It goes on and on. And so I'll keep this kind of notes as well. Lenin's appeal to the unions, the note, and then I have that appeal in my research, so I can go right from there to check or use that. So I was doing a lot of that when I was doing the book research, and also I interviewed some major historians, and I wanted to make sure that I had that research in the card file, so I could use it. But then something came along that I've completely fallen in love with, which is Scrivener. If anybody has used Scrivener, this is when you start doing online research. Why would you do note cards that you'd have to sit on top of your keyboard when you're sitting at your keyboard? You don't need it anymore. So Scrivener is a program that is, I believe it is not free anymore. It used to be free, and now it's like $40 or something like that. Well worth it. And the greatest thing about Scrivener is that you can toggle between your writing and your research, your writing and your notes. And the Scrivener that I had been using could not be exported. You couldn't directly send, say, your editor a chapter from Scrivener. You had to move it into Word and then send it from Word. And I got really sick of that. So I just started working in Word, but I kept all my research on Scrivener. And let me show you how that works. And Pinar says Eon for timelining, which I've never used. But Scrivener is great. I'm going to turn this around now. So this is my Scrivener for Comrade Marina, it was called. And it had its chapters in groups of chapters, which this is first draft. So, and the two books, Marina and Chimes, that was continuous. So, so these are just chapters, and they open up, and there's the chapter, here's another chapter, and it just opens up. But the best thing about Scrivener is this. Let's get to the research. So I have my research separately from my chapters in a way that I can use it. You can split the screen, which I did some of this when I was working on. You can split the screen so that, say, this one will be a bit of your research. And I can go back and forth from my chapter that I'm working on to my research on the screen at the same time. And I have a teeny little screen. I have a very small little laptop that I used. But this is very useful to go back and forth. What was that character's name? Let's see. Where's my character list? Cast of characters. So that I used all the time. You know, what was the name of that character? That Ionian, you know, Bogdan, all the names. Make sure I have all the names so I don't miss people, miss their names. You know, in each chapter or each section, I make sure, oh, I changed somebody's name. Agafia, the maid, the maid at the parents' house at Verstadskaya Street. I changed her name because there's another person, Evdokia, and Evdokia and Agafia got people confused. So I made sure to note, oh, I have changed that person's name, and forever after, you know, I'll remember everybody's name. But eventually I stopped using this, you know, I stopped writing on Scrivener for second draft and just used it to hold all of my research. Here's a bunch of titles. I didn't have a title for the Revolution of Marina M yet. So here are some of the titles. And eventually I did pick one of these. Is the Revolution of Marina M. I believe it's in that list. The 3 revolutions of Marina Makarova. So eventually it was Marina M. I keep my acknowledgments there. So as people have helped you, you just stick them in there. I have my cast of characters, which kept evolving as I went on. I kept notebooks of not only research like time research, but sense research. What did the family home smell like? What did the Poets Collective smell like? You know, what do the streets smell like? What does summer smell like? I kept a list of Russian surnames because eventually I would, you know, I'm making up surnames all the time, and I just need a place where I can go and just look at them instead of going on the internet 80 bazillion times, clicking away. You just had a little pocket guide. Peasant names, you know, just like your classic Russian names that aren't too fancified. And then a lot of faces. I have a lot of this is very good for pictures. So here's pictures. I could organize all my pictures of characters as I saw them. You know, here's the father, here's the mother. You know, and just because you need to be able to describe faces. So I mean, I have individual faces. There's Marina. You know, there's all kinds of Marina, you know. I have the baby. You know, here's Genya, you know, some of his thing. Here's Kolya, you know, doing his thing. I mean, this is not exactly Kolya, but there's something about, you know, Klaus Maria Brandauer that reminds me of him. Here's Arkady. And I have their photographs all here to check out. Yeah, of course, Vishneva. Here's the baby. Here's Iskra, you know. It reminds me, what do babies look like? I mean, it's been a long time. And a little redheaded baby. And then I didn't know she was going to, you know, if you've read it. If you haven't read it, I won't give it away. But, you know, I didn't know that I wasn't going to need, like, little girl pictures. Uh-huh. Yep. And this is a famous Russian a painter, woman painter, and I just love the people. There she is, Serebryakova. That's the painter. And these were her, this is some of her pictures. And it just, oh, there's some more redheads. Just for Marina, here's what is Ukashin all about? And then peasant life, what did that cradle look like? Can I describe that? There's you and your cow, out in the middle of nowhere. This is a peasant life. And it helps me to stay accurate. It helps me to keep things vivid. How was a peasant izba organized? What does a Russian peasant stove look like? I kept the poems of the characters all in one place. The House of Arts, here's a futurist manifesto, to remind me what the slap in the face of public taste looked like, which began, it was in Marina M. It was the thing that Mayakovsky and his buddies dreamed up to throw everybody from the ship of modernity. I needed the actual language of that. So I've used that plenty. What else? It's great for photos, and then sometimes I would do screenshots of work instead of doing the note cards. Just places. Here's Genya's world. Genya's when she had the apartment with the boys. What that looked like. Bridges. There's a lot of hanging out on bridges. What do these things look like? I need to be able to go back and back and back. This was an amazing thing. It was like address by address down Nevsky Prospect, what all those buildings look like. And this is where she marches during the revolution. If I didn't have that, I was there and I took a lot of pictures, but to have this so nicely organized to go back and it's like where am I going to have Mina's family live? Where am I going to have this happen or that happen? It just reminds me where everything is. And I'm crazy. They renamed all the streets during the revolution. And because I am writing about the revolution, they didn't use the Soviet names. They used the former names. And I had to keep track of all of these names. And the maps might say something completely different. But what was it before the revolution? They, Bloch lived on Officerskaya Street, which became Dekabristov. And it was Officerskaya. So I needed to keep track of that. Timelines were important, but just like here's, not only are we talking about the February Revolution and the Women's March, but there's the Women's March. Those were the women. I didn't have to make up what was on their signs. There were photographs of what was on their signs. October Revolution timeline. It has these index cards here, but I want the night. What happened on the night of the 24th? The night of the coup. The timeline. John Reed's timeline. Everybody else's timeline. There's Maslow. This had to be right. And so you imagine, but if you get too far into your imagining, you have to come back and make sure you're getting it right. What does a ration card look like? There's one right there. Let's see what else I got. Weather. I have a whole category of weather. What can you see in the dark? I had a street light scene. And it's like I had to go out and research it. I had to go outside and have somebody stand in the street light and see what can I see and what can't I see. You know, this is research too. Snow. I live in LA. I have to do research on snow and cold. Here's this guy. This was one of my informants, Tobin Auber, who's also a Facebook friend if he's watching, who reminded me what about the cold. If you're crying, we don't think the tears would freeze, at least not until you've been outside a good hour or two. It's damp. If you've long eyelashes, water creates in them and freezes. The hairs in your nose freeze. Now, thank you. He lives in Petersburg, and he has a good sense of what, what gets cold, where it gets cold. And different people have a different sense. I got a Russian village in winter. Boy, I'll tell you, I use that picture so often just to imagine, especially when she leaves, if anybody's read it, when she leaves Ionia and goes to Olya's village, I could just see her there. Here's a river that's not frozen, so that's November. They're still out there. Flora and fauna. You want to always keep track of what the non-human element. So what are the plants and birds of Russia, and especially of her area of Russia, the north, Petrograd and then inland. And it's like birches, willows, a rowan. We don't have that. Bird cherry, very important in Russia. Acacia, meadowsweet, the different kinds of shrubs. The gulls, I remember that from Petersburg, and how she would feel the cries of the gulls as a sense of other places. There are common terns, there's field fares, I didn't even know what that was. The red-necked phalarope, I did not use that. And then spring, what do you see in spring? The curlew, the whimbrel, the godwit, and snipe. I mean, I wanted this information. What kind of animals do we have? And then maps. Here's like all the corps in the eighth. This is the Southwest Front where her brother Volodya was stationed, 1915 September, and who was on the Brusilov Front, 8th Army. That's my guy. And then I could decide which of the divisions he was with. And basically there's another one that tells you how many men are in a division, how many men are in a regiment. So you have an idea of who, and these are all often where people come from. So Pskov Infantry Regiment would be from the city of Pskov. They liked people to fight together who knew each other. And here you are. So I had to decide. I knew the brother was in the Cavalry Corps, and then I had to decide which of the Cavalry Corps was he going to be in. So it just helps you give yourself a better sense. And timelines, there's always just more and more timelines, and try to pull them together. Here, the lifeguard regiments, which figure in the revolution of Marina M, were divided by their looks. So the Preobrazhensky regiment were tall and blonde. Semyonovskys were tall and brown-haired and beardless. They were considered handsome. They would take handsome recruits. The Ismailovskys were dark hair. Other ranks of the first company wore beards. The Pavlovskys had to be pug-nosed like Paul I and not especially tall. All blonde hair except for the 9th Company, brown hair. Beards in the 5th Company. They wore brass-fronted grenadier mitre caps. The Finlandskys were small and slim. Litovskys were tall and blonde. This is the kind of thing, if you were a girl growing up in St. Petersburg, which was a formidable base it was a barracks. It was during the war, with all these regiments. The girls would all know which of these regiments they liked the best. Did they like the Grenadiers, dark hair, wearing first company, wearing beards? Did they like the Volinskis? You know, and then we also know, you know, who they came from and what happened with those regiments during the Revolution. I've got quotes from Trotsky in the defense of Petrograd. I actually got the quotes here, the whole thing, you know, I can cut and paste. And then this is the one I found significant, obviously. And I had to get permission to use what I got, but it gives me an idea of how he roused the city for its defense. You know, the Petrograd card, if you've read the book, that's there it is, that's the language. Then crime, there was a lot of crime in my book, and there was a particular, I just, you know, I wanted to know, there was a character who was in the Cheka. So I wanted to know what the Cheka was going on, watching the railway union. And we know I have a lot about the railway union because a lot of smuggling was going on with them. And there was a huge tension because they were the strongest union in the country. And the Bolsheviks wanted to get rid of their separate power as a break on the Bolsheviks. So this becomes really important in the book. You know, just what they were up to. Labor book. That's what a labor book looked like. And, you know, if you've read the book, that becomes a hugely important part of everyday Russian life is, did you have this? Did you have one? And did it have a class that was helpful to you? Did it say bourgeois or did it say proletarian? Songs, you know, when you go to a march, they're going to sing songs. And this was a really important one. This was the Workers' Marseillaise. And so I was able to have them singing it. I needed to keep track of that song and make sure I could use it. I had You Fell Victim. That was a really important one, you know, to the martyrs of the revolution. And always Russian, you know, they always would get screwed and die and have these funeral processions that were political. Here's Agit Trains, article on Agit Trains. You know, she was on an Agit train. JSTOR. Anybody doing historical research, you can get access to a portal called JSTOR through your library. And the historical articles are all available through JSTOR. You know, here's one from the University of Glasgow, a medium for the masses, agitation in the Soviet Civil War. Well, where would I ever have found that except for through JSTOR? You know, and I have the whole piece. I have the whole article. I can go back and back and back. What else do we have? Railroad workers. That's what they looked like. That was the uniform. That was very helpful. This, if you've read Chimes of Lost Cathedral, mothers, don't abandon your babies, your children. This is something that Marina goes to the women's club in Tikhvin, and this is hugely important. And she later works with orphans because poor women did have to abandon children so that they could keep the ones they had going. This was orphans were a terrible problem when society is stressed. Then these were just quotes about peasant agriculture, which sounds pretty, it's like Tolstoy and land reform and stuff. But I have my character working the land with peasants during the Civil War. And I needed to know, what were they planting? How much did they plant? What was the rotation? Rye, oats, and flax. I mean, I had to know that oats is the first crop and can be grown in wet soil. And what kind of work was it? I mean, they just lived in the fields. Peasant work, there's nothing as hard as that kind of labor. They they live in the field for months. They don't even go home. They just sleep under the wagons. Men and women working side by side. But of course, eventually they couldn't work side by side because the men were all had all been conscripted. But how you did that kind of labor, and just pictures of peasant women and how, what did they look like, and I can make that big and really describe faces. Just more peasant life, agriculture. Here's a typical village, it's the mud in. I could hear the bugs in the trees, shrieking in the summertime. It gives me such a feel for Russia. And, I can toggle that. What else do I have? Documents I needed. This is the contents of Communist #1. So we know that Varvara, her friend Varvara, was part of that movement. Evolution of local Soviets in Petrograd, This is the kind of thing. Anyway, it's super useful to have this particular program to organize your research like nothing else. There's just nothing like, there's a figure, Koche the Deathless, which I used in different places in the two novels. He's a mythical figure, a kind of arch villain, Koche the Deathless. And I wanted to gather all kinds of information about Koche the Deathless so that I could use him whenever I wanted. Kitej, the legend of Kitej, that's the chimes of the Lost Cathedral comes from that. And different opinions about and different iterations of that legend. So I could keep that together. Titles, long lists of titles of if you don't get a title right off, it's really nice to have a list. Anyway, so Scrivener is a hugely, there we are. Oh, sorry. Scrivener was a hugely useful element, and I am going to invite a student of mine, April Davila, to come next week, and she gives tutorials on Scrivener, and she has a new novel out, 142 Ostriches. So it's the same week as it comes out. So she's going to be here, and we'll look, maybe, get some more tricks on Scrivener. But anyway, organize your research so that you can use it, not so you get a gold star on your organizing chart. Don't use it as something to back away from the writing of the book. Just a rough and dirty organizing so that you can find what you need and get it going. And I'm big on big sheets of paper to try to get the big picture, like the conductor's score, where where you can find everything, map things out. Oh my God, the maps of the apartments of Petrograd. I found a site that has photographs of all kinds of communal apartments, and I've used that to death. So anyway, how did you not get lost in the abyss? Well, this is how you don't get lost. You have to use it in a place where you can find it and try to pull it together on big sheets of paper, mapping, to fix it in your head, all the different aspects. That's right. You can go right through your library for JSTOR, and without it, I would not have been able to write this book. I watch out for the hand scribbles, yeah. You know, at least scribble it on a note card. If you hand scribble, scribble it on a note card, not post-it notes, not on the back of an envelope. Make sure that you just get you'll figure out, am I going to use this size or the one slightly smaller? Have them just as handy as a post-it note and write it on that, and then write where it came from on the top and maybe a subject matter on the top. You will find it very useful. All right, well, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. Bye.